Chapter 1027. Li Tianlan thought for a while, then shook his head slightly and continued, I should arrive earlier than him. If I'm late, you can receive him for me first. It won't take long. Li Tianlan was almost sure that the rain on Mount Dibbing had something to do with Xianyuan Wuxiang. In this way, he had the answer to why Wang Tianzong's sword chi doppelganger suddenly had a complete consciousness. Otherwise, in Wang Tianzong's state, the current sword chi doppelganger should be dominated by worryless. Xianyuan Wuxiang did help Wang Tianzong, but in Li Tianlan's view, he could do far more than that. Only he could vaguely feel what the majestic vitality meant. At this time, Wang Tianzong's injury had indeed improved a lot, but strictly speaking, he was just barely out of the line of death, and his consciousness was relatively active. Xianyuan Wuxiang saved Wang Tianzong's life, but if he wanted to, according to the scale of the rain, Li Tianlan had no doubt that Xianyuan Wuxiang could temporarily wake Wang Tianzong up. He could do it, but he didn't. His help saved Li Tianlan from the crisis of facing worryless, which was undoubtedly his kindness to Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan didn't know if the rain meant that Xianyuan Wuxiang carried the fate of other countries, or something else. But in the face of such a person, even if he really ran to him and called him Big Brother, he couldn't really treat him as a little brother. Apart from other things, since he went to East Island and entered the battlefield, Emperor Dong's palace didn't lose anyone. For this alone, Xianyuan Wuxiang deserved some respect from Li Tianlan. Okay, I'll arrange it. Qin Weibai nodded and said softly. Li Tianlan nodded and heard the sound of his phone running out of battery. He slowly shook his head and said, the phone is running out of battery. I'm hanging up. Okay. Qin Weibai paused and suddenly said, is Beihai really okay? The helicopter was flying above. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and said, are you worried that the joint forces will come back? Even if they will, I don't know how long it will be, at least not now. No, I mean, although you helped Beihai, Wang Xingxiao seems to have feelings for Wuqing. Qin Weibai said softly. He can only think about it. Li Tianlan smiled a little coldly. I'm in good health now, but I'm in a bad state. But no matter what, Wang Tianzong's Beihai can handle me. Wang Xingxiao is under a lot of pressure. He has too many things on his back, so it's inevitable that he's overcautious. I don't care what he thinks, just like many people have ideas about you. I dare to chop him up, but he doesn't dare to. He doesn't even dare to try. How domineering. Qin Weibai's voice was sweet and sticky. Li Tianlan laughed. He was not complacent, but he inevitably felt a little relieved. I actually hoped that he could try, but unfortunately. Silence. Li Tianlan was still speaking. However, all sounds seemed to have disappeared in an instant. Gotcha, the phone shattered in Li Tianlan's hand. Li Tianlan's pupils instantly contracted to the extreme. The moment the fragments of the mobile phone fell from his hand, Li Tianlan stretched out his palm. Heartless, who had already transformed into a great sword, suddenly shuddered. Boom! An earth-shattering noise suddenly sounded in the dense forest below the helicopter, roaring endlessly. There were many people in the dark world who had ideas about Li Tianlan, and there were also many people who had ideas about Heartless. If they killed Li Tianlan, they would get benefits. If they killed Heartless, they would get absolutely invincible force. What Wang Xingxiao dared not try, someone dared to try. The surrounding space was turbulent and shattered. The normal flying helicopter was directly torn into scrap iron in the moment when the domain fluctuated. The pilot of the Wang family of Beihai silently evaporated in the air. Li Tianlan's palm touched the hilt of the sword. A streak of sword energy protected Moongaze and Song in front of him. In his sight, the whole forest below was shaking wildly. The majestic sword energy and the tide-like domain merged with each other, forming a wave of air that swept through the area of 10,000 meters in an instant. The domain and the sword energy were completely boiling, rising into the sky, and in an instant, they were directly in front of Li Tianlan. They were caught off guard. Jianghu. Li Kuangtu. Li Tianlan was not on guard at all. The surging sword light and domain, which were enough to tear everything apart, surged into the sky. Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu could not be seen. Their joint attack lifted the whole forest in an instant. Broken tree trunks, flying leaves, and cold snow flew toward Li Tianlan under the surging power. They covered the sky and the sun. They arrived in an instant. No one expected Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu to appear here. The two of them, who were seriously injured, did not escape. Instead, they ambushed Li Tianlan here. There was no despicable and shameless saying in the dark world. There was no doubt that if Li Tianlan died here today, then the final battle in Beihai would be a wonderful turnaround for Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu. Li Tianlan raised the Heartless in his hand. The huge sword body of the Heartless trembled violently. Bang! The dark sword body shattered in an instant. The little energy that was left in the Heartless suddenly burst out at the most critical moment. The colorful energy was mighty. At the moment when the sword light and the broken domain hit Li Tianlan, it formed a protective shield and enveloped Li Tianlan. It was like a huge wave crashing against the reef. The boundless surging domain and the sword light directly collided with the protective barrier, and then rushed past it. The domain and the sword light surged into the distance, and then turned back at a faster speed. Standing in the protective shield, Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes tightly. Ahem, a hoarse cough with a hint of weakness could be heard. Li Tianlan still did not see Li Guangtu and Jiang Shangyu. But Li Guangtu's voice seemed to be in his ears. Our enmity actually began in Tiandu. As if he was muttering to himself, Li Guangtu's voice had an extremely depressed and cold emotion. My only son died in the hands of the Samsara Palace. It can only be that he died in the hands of the Samsara Palace. The sword light was surging. The two experts who had surpassed the peak of the invincible realm attacked with all their strength. The little energy that was left in the Heartless was consumed at a speed visible to the naked eye, and the protective shield was getting thinner and thinner. There was no doubt that when the protective shield broke, Li Tianlan, who had almost no physical strength, would be completely torn apart in an instant. It's that bitch Qin Weibai's idea. Li Guangtu laughed extremely coldly. Go in peace. If you see the old man on the way, tell him that I will make the Li family surpass the peak. You can all rest in peace. I will get Emperor Dong's palace, and I will get Qin Weibai. She killed my son, so she must give me another one. The boiling sword light suddenly intensified. In an instant, the morning sunshine was completely suppressed. It was dark between heaven and earth, and only the extremely crazy sword energy rushed over endlessly. Crack, a ghastly crack appeared on the protective barrier. Li Guangtu's voice fell. Everything you have is mine. Crack, the cracks covered the entire protective shield in an instant. Li Tianlan, who was expressionless, looked at the sword light in front of him and whispered, "Isn't it good to be alive?" The shattered Heartless had become the 13-story building, constantly shaking around Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan had no sword in his hand. He just raised his palm casually and closed his eyes. His finger lightly tapped on the protective shield. A weak, almost imperceptible sword energy flowed out of Li Tianlan's hand. The darkness was instantly broken. The sun shrouded the earth again. The sword energy in Li Tianlan's hand disappeared. The surging domain and sword light in front of him also completely disappeared. Puff! Blood spurted out of Li Tianlan's mouth. The tiny, almost imperceptible sword energy slowly fluctuated between heaven and earth. Puff! Not only the corners of his mouth, but every part of Li Tianlan's body was breaking. Blood spurted out of his body. As far as his eyes could see, everything was disappearing. The forest within the area of tens of thousands of meters disappeared completely in an instant. It was not breaking. It was really, inexplicably disappearing without warning. Li Tianlan's body trembled violently. Thousands of wounds appeared on his body in an instant, covering his whole body. At the same time. European land. In Worry's villa. Qin Weibai, who was lying quietly in the nutrition chamber, frowned slightly. A clear crack appeared between her eyebrows, and crystal blood flowed out from between her eyebrows. On the helicopter from East Island to Tiannan, Xianyuan Wuxiang's face changed dramatically. He couldn't see Li Tianlan through the screen, but at this moment, in his sight, the whole world had changed completely. The tiny sword energy that seemed to disappear at any time was still surging in Beihai. The tens of thousands of meters of forest had completely disappeared. The sword energy was surging, rushing to Mount Dibing and Xingzhou City. Everything disappeared silently the moment it came into contact with the sword qi. Li Tianlan's body was almost drained of vitality in an instant, and even his heart began to break. F***ck. Xianyuan Wuxiang suddenly cursed. In front of Saint, he suddenly stood up. The moment he stood up, there were many illusory blue lines in the whole world. Countless symbols replaced the surrounding space and filled the world. At the same time, the world around Li Tianlan suddenly became virtual. Countless lines wandered wildly between heaven and earth, flashing one symbol after another. The world became completely virtual in an instant. There was no distance in the virtual world. Xianyuan Wuxiang took a step forward. The next second, his chubby hand directly grabbed Li Tianlan's shoulder, and his whole body appeared in front of Li Tianlan. The voice of F***ck was still echoing over East Island. Above Beihai, Xianyuan Wuxiang's voice also rang out, "Are you crazy?" Endless vitality poured into Li Tianlan's body. The sword energy that was slowly fluctuating in the distance disappeared without a trace the moment he appeared. Crack. The world returned to normal. The virtual world became real again. The eyes on the bridge of Xianyuan Wuxiang's nose exploded without warning. The fragments flew everywhere, and two dazzling red lines of blood flowed out of Xianyuan Wuxiang's eyes. Li Tianlan's consciousness was completely blurred, and he was about to fall silent. Xianyuan Wuxiang's glasses exploded. He was only a doctor, and he didn't even have the ability to float. The two of them leaned close to each other and fell from the sky quickly. At the same time, the two of them fell. No one knew how far away. In an incomparably huge and magnificent laboratory, countless signal lights all lit up in an instant. The next second, a clear and somewhat weird voice rang out, "Miracle City found, location confirmed, Apostle number 6 is about to go, distance estimation in progress, distance estimation complete, distance unknown, set off immediately." Chapter 1028. Bang! Smoke and dust flew all over the sky. Xianyuan Wuxiang held Li Tianlan, who was covered in blood, and smashed him to the ground. Xianyuan Wuxiang, who looked sad and angry, felt that he was not cool at all. He landed in a very awkward position, but his body was not injured. Blood was still flowing from his eyes, dripping. The drops of blood were extremely bright in the sun, red and dazzling. Xianyuan Wuxiang wiped his eyes casually and opened his eyes, which were completely overflowing with blood. As soon as he got up, he began to check Li Tianlan's situation. In the silent world, there was an extremely subtle sound. Blood penetrated the skin, cut through the clothes, and soaked the ground. Li Tianlan lay quietly on the ground without a sound. It seemed that he had completely died. His injury seemed to have almost completely destroyed his consciousness. He was so seriously injured that even the dragon vein had fallen silent. The white mist of vitality that seemed to be able to heal his body at any time soon disappeared. Crazy, Xianyuan Wuxiang muttered to himself. He opened his eyes, and blood kept flowing from his eyes. His eyes were blood red, which looked extremely horrible, as if he was shedding tears of blood. "I knew you were fierce, but you were too fierce. Damn it, I knew there was a trap in the 24 moves of sword left by that guy. Reincarnation. Damn you." Xianyuan Wuxiang gently pressed his hand on Li Tianlan's chest. Strong vitality bloomed in an instant. The completely boiling white mist rose into the sky with strong vitality. From a distance, it seemed that a huge cloud had suddenly appeared above the two of them. Xianyuan Wuxiang's whole body was emitting a faint light. The light was not dazzling, but it looked soft and lively. Wisps of light enveloped Li Tianlan little by little, healing the wounds on his body. Li Tianlan's body lay quietly on the ground. His body began to sink slowly. Xianyuan Wushang's body was also sinking. The wind and clouds were surging in the empty forest, and the majestic vitality kept surging, more and more intense. The flat land under Li Tianlan had quickly turned into yellow sand at a speed visible to the naked eye. The range of the yellow sand kept expanding. 10 meters, 100 meters, 1,000 meters, several thousand meters. The originally lush forest was razed to the ground by Li Tianlan's sword. Now, as the white fog surged, the forest within an area of nearly 10,000 meters completely turned into a desert at a speed that was enough to make everyone stunned. Xianyuan Wushang was expressionless, but his seemingly harmless face was extremely stern. The soft light shrunk back and forth between him and Li Tianlan. Within an area of nearly 10,000 meters, every blade of grass, every tree, and even the vitality of the earth were all extracted by him to heal Li Tianlan's wounds. The wounds on Li Tianlan's body were disappearing at a very slow rate. And with the two of them as the center, the area of the desert. It was getting bigger and bigger. Xianyuan Wushang hesitated, glanced in the direction of Mount Dibing, and slowly stopped. The light dissipated. Most of the wounds on Li Tianlan's body had healed completely. However, the inside of his body was still in a state of fragmentation. His consciousness had already declined to the lowest point, like a candle that was about to burn out. He didn't even need wind. Just a small gust of air was enough to completely extinguish the flame. Xianyuan Wushang's eyes were gloomy. This kind of injury was indeed extremely terrible. But Xianyuan Wushang thought he was the most professional doctor. If this kind of injury happened to someone else, or in another place, it would not be a problem for him at all. He had countless ways to make the other person recover in the shortest time possible. But he couldn't cure Li Tianlan. It was just like how it was difficult for him to cure Qin Weibai in a short time. Because of Qin Weibai, he could do almost nothing about Li Tianlan's current injury. Real, Xianyuan Wushang muttered to himself, and his whole person became more and more irritable. Li Tianlan's current injury was so serious because of the sword energy. This could definitely be regarded as a huge mistake. But it was also a mistake that Xianyuan Wushang had not expected at all. Xing Tian's attack in East Island changed something. At that time, Xianyuan Wushang saw Li Tianlan's abnormality on the screen, but his attention was all on Wuqing. Wuqing could feel the sword energy in the sky, and he was not surprised. But Xianyuan Wushang did not expect that Li Tianlan could also feel the sword energy. Perhaps in Li Tianlan's mind, his kendo was already perfect, and there was no sword energy that he could not withstand. So in the face of Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu's sneak attack, he directly used the thing that he did not see clearly and was not even sure if it was sword energy. The 15th blade, Samsara. After that, it was not the shattering of land, but an imitation of the sword energy. Li Tianlan's imitation was somewhat nondescript. It could be said that he did not grasp the essence at all, and did not even have the shape. But that kind of sword energy should not have existed. Even if it was just an imitation, Li Tianlan suffered irreversible damage in an instant. And that nondescript sword energy also did not completely break out, but there was a wisp of seemingly and extremely weak sword intent. The moment the sword intent surged, the vitality in Li Tianlan's body had almost been drained. His body was completely torn apart, and his internal organs were permanently damaged. The foundation of martial arts was almost completely broken, and his spiritual will was in chaos. Xianyuan Wushang alone could do nothing about Li Tianlan's current state. If it were not for Qin Weibai of the Worry-Free Villa, Li Tianlan would have completely died the moment the sword energy appeared. Xianyuan Wushang tried to enter the depths of Li Tianlan's consciousness, but his several attempts all ended in failure. Li Tianlan's consciousness still existed. But that kind of existence was almost non-existent. You are really my brother. Can I call you my brother? Xianyuan Wushang smiled bitterly. I just got here, and I'm going to ask for help from my family. Will many people think that I'm a good-for-nothing? He muttered to himself and stretched out his palm. Pieces of glimmer appeared in the sun. Let's get out of here first. Xianyuan Wushang whispered. Countless broken glimmers gathered in Xianyuan Wushang's hand. Those were the fragments of his glasses that had been blown up when he was in the air. Tisk, Xianyuan Wushang shook his head. I can use it again. He clenched the fragments in his hand. All kinds of light enveloped him and Li Tianlan. Heaven and earth were nothingness. Everything around them was distorting. The desert, the cold wind, the sky, the white clouds, the sun, everything became fainter and fainter in the distortion. Xianyuan Wushang carefully carried Li Tianlan on his back. Feeling his cold body temperature, Xianyuan Wushang also felt cold in his heart. His expression looked extremely tragic. Everything in the world disappeared. Amidst the extreme distortions, everything in the surroundings turned into pieces of virtual yet existing data. Xianyuan Wushang sighed and took a step forward with Li Tianlan on his back. The broken piece of glasses in his hand suddenly shattered into pieces, turning into a cloud of dust. The surrounding environment instantly changed from cold to warm. Xianyuan Wushang appeared in a warm and comfortable bedroom with Li Tianlan on his back. The bedroom was filled with a natural and rich fragrance. Xianyuan Wushang carefully put Li Tianlan on the big bed in the bedroom. The sun in Tiannan was just right. Xianyuan Wushang hesitated, then opened the door and went out. Outside the bedroom was a luxurious corridor. Xianyuan Wushang entered the elevator. The elevator went all the way down to the first floor. When the elevator door opened, what appeared in front of Xianyuan Wushang was the picture of the hall on the first floor of the headquarters of Emperor Dong's palace. Qin Weibai had just put down the phone in her hand and was about to enter the elevator with a slight frown. She did not know why Li Tianlan suddenly hung up the phone, but the moment the phone was hung up, her heart was occupied by a fierce uneasiness without warning. Uneasy, she subconsciously raised her head the moment the elevator door opened. The next second, she was obviously stunned for a moment. Sister-in-law. Xianyuan Wushang smiled helplessly. Qin Weibai looked stunned. Why are you here? It's not just me. Xianyuan Wushang touched his nose. I brought my big brother back. He's in your bedroom now. Chapter 1029. The sound of the instrument's operation echoed in the bedroom. The pen kept recording all kinds of physical data on the paper. Naylan Shuriying stared at the constantly flowing symbols on the screen, her face stiff and pale. Qin Weibai sat by the bed and reached out to hold Li Tianlan's cold palm. She had been silent for a long time. Less than a minute after she hung up the phone, Xianyuan Wushang and Li Tianlan, who had not been together before, returned to Tiannan from East Island and Beihai respectively. This sounded absolutely incredible, but no one could care about it at this time. All Qin Weibai's thoughts were on Li Tianlan. Click, the subtle sound of the instrument suddenly increased a little, and then it stopped operating. Naylan Shuriying stared at the last line of symbols flowing out of the instrument and gently bit her lip. How is it? Qin Weibai raised her head and looked at Naylan Shuriying, a little nervous. Naylan Shuriying seemed to be confirming something. She reached out and took the notebook in the assistant's hand that recorded Li Tianlan's data. She glanced at it, and then fell silent again. Speak. Qin Weibai's heart kept sinking, and her voice became cold. She had a hunch about something. Li Tianlan's hand was held by her, and it was cold without any temperature. She hoped that she could hear a glimmer of hope. But Naylan Shuriying was destined not to give her this. His Majesty's physical condition is very good, that is to say, he has no trauma. But most of the tissues in his body have been torn apart, especially the heart and the area around the heart. There are more than 320 wounds of various kinds. At present, almost all the organs in His Majesty's body have lost activity, and they have basically stopped running and self-repairing, so. Naylan Shuriying paused and said with some embarrassment, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. Qin Weibai's body shook violently. Naylan Shuriying's voice continued, now it seems that His Majesty's injury is even more serious than that of the one in Carefree Villa. At present, we can only test his body, and we can't even test his consciousness, or, she wanted to say something but stopped on second thought, but her meaning was very clear. Basically, it was unlikely that their instruments could not detect the patient's consciousness. Now that this happened, it seemed that there could only be one problem. Li Tianlan had lost consciousness. Without consciousness, he was naturally a dead man. Li Tianlan had reached the limit of the human body in all aspects, ensuring the activity of his body. So now it seemed that he was still alive, but in fact, he had already died. This was Nayland Shuriang's conclusion. When she tested the master of Samsara Palace of Carefree Villa, the conclusion she got was that she was infinitely close to death, but at least there was still hope. But now Li Tianlan, being infinitely close to death and truly dying were two completely different concepts. Qin Weibai's body trembled slightly. She looked at Li Tianlan on the bed. Li Tianlan's face quickly became blurred and hazy in his sight. How could this be? She muttered to herself. We just hung up the phone. She touched Li Tianlan's face and looked around the bedroom blankly. Everything around him was a blur. Qin Weibai rubbed her eyes and finally saw Xianyuan Wuxiang, who was standing in a corner with a gloomy expression and seemed to be thinking about something. What happened? She asked softly. At this moment, Qin Weibai looked a little pitiful, but with a kind of extreme madness. Xianyuan Wuxiang's eyes flickered, and his mind wandered. He seemed to be hesitating about something, so he didn't hear Qin Weibai's voice at all, nor did he hear the conversation between Nayland Shuriang and Qin Weibai. Tell me, what's going on? Qin Weibai asked again. Her voice was faint, with an indescribable deathly stillness. Xianyuan Wuxiang suddenly came to his senses. This, he scratched his head. It's Jiang Shangyu and Li Kuangtu. After they withdrew from Mount Dibing, they didn't choose to leave. They chose to sneak attack Big Brother on his way back. Big Brother used some means that he shouldn't have used now, so that his body couldn't bear the power he used and completely collapsed. Strictly speaking, it's not a big deal, but it's a little troublesome. Jiang Shangyu, Li Kuangtu, sneak attack, completely collapsed. One word after another made Qin Weibai's eyes burn with endless madness, but all the crazy emotions disappeared at a faster speed. Nayland Shuriang looked at Xianyuan Wuxiang with a dull face. Both she and Qin Weibai captured Xianyuan Wuxiang's last words. It was not a big deal, but it was a little troublesome. If such a situation was not a big deal, then what was a big deal? Qin Weibai suddenly stood up. It seemed that because she used too much strength, her body swayed forward. She fell down. Horsewoman on the side subconsciously supported Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai's voice was a little distorted with excitement. Can you save Tianlan? I can't. Xianyuan Wuxiang shook his head. This is the most troublesome part, but I have a way. What way? Tell me. Qin Weibai's voice was a little shrill. Xianyuan Wuxiang hesitated and shook his head. Looking at Qin Weibai, he said with a wry smile, Sister-in-law, don't worry. I treated Big Brother's external injuries, so I know his situation very well. You really can't do anything about such an injury, but I have more than one way. That's why I'm hesitating. Because at present, I can think of different ways that will lead to different consequences. I've informed my family about this. Say something I can understand. Qin Weibai stared into Xianyuan Wuxiang's eyes. How can Tianlan get better now? 3 days. It should be enough. Xianyuan Wuxiang's tone was straightforward and calm. No words could be more powerful than this guarantee. Qin Weibai's body obviously relaxed for a moment, and she asked without hesitation, what does your family want? We don't need anything. Xianyuan Wuxiang laughed. Sister-in-law, I've been saying and doing since I came here. We are family, so I don't mind you being on guard against me. Because there are some things that I really can't say now, and I can't explain to you. But I really don't need you to do anything to help Emperor Dong's palace. Our family can't let anything happen to Big Brother. Qin Weibai looked at Xianyuan Wushang seriously and said seriously, "Thank you." Xianyuan Wushang smiled and waved his hand. "I'll take care of Big Brother." He laughed softly and said, "I need peace. Remove all the equipment here and take away the medicine." Naylan Shuriying was obviously stunned and subconsciously looked at Qin Weibai. "Remove the equipment and take away the medicine?" Qin Weibai frowned slightly. "What are you going to do?" "We've already begun to discuss countermeasures. I'll participate in the family meeting later. As for now, my father suggested that I communicate with sister-in-law." Xianyuan Wushang said. "Communicate with me about what?" Qin Weibai was a little surprised. "It's not you." Xianyuan Wushang shook his head and then nodded. "But it's also you. To be exact, it's you in Worry-Free Heights." Chapter 1030. The desert stopped spreading. Yellow sand replaced the forest, covering an area of nearly 20 kilometers outside Xingzhou city. It could be called a miracle in the daytime. The geological survey team of Beihai responded immediately. Wang Xingxiao didn't even have time to deal with the affairs of Mount Dibing and Kanglan. He rushed here as fast as he could. All kinds of information from Kanglan kept coming. Wang Xingxiao browsed through the messages one after another, feeling a little uneasy. The phone rang suddenly. Wang Xingxiao's palm shook violently, and he answered the phone immediately. "Patriarch, the location is confirmed." The voice of Lu Yang, the person in charge of Mount Dibing Air Force Base, sounded. 205 meters in front of you is the place where B-2-013 lost contact. B-2-013. To be precise, it was the number 013 helicopter of the 2nd Squadron of Team B of Mount Dibing Air Force Base. When Li Tianlan left Mount Dibing for Xingzhou Airport, he took this helicopter. The helicopter suddenly lost contact when it approached Xingzhou, and all the signals were completely cut off. Wang Xingxiao felt something was wrong when he got the news, so he quickly went down the mountain and rushed to the scene. He got the news of the desert in Xingzhou 10 minutes ago when he was on his way here. Wang Xingxiao took the phone and nodded, then walked forward about 200 meters. Lu Yang's voice sounded again. "It's about here, with an error of about 2 meters. Wang Xingxiao looked up at the sky. After the snow, the sun in Beihai was clear and bright, and the sky was blue. Under his feet was soft and dry yellow sand. There was nothing unusual here, and no helicopter wreckage could be seen. Wang Xingxiao was silent for a while, and suddenly waved his hand. A sharp sword intent suddenly appeared in the desert. The sword energy went deep into the ground, and in an instant, it soaked the desert for dozens of meters under his feet. Still, nothing was found. "No," Wang Xingxiao said. Number 013 disappeared very suddenly. Its signal was completely cut off and disappeared in 0.7 seconds. This speed is faster than the reaction speed of the pilot, and it is faster than number 013's warning mechanism. It makes me feel as if it disappeared into thin air the moment it appeared here. Lu Yang's tone was a little strange. Wang Xingxiao twitched the corner of his mouth, but the smile on his face was a little vague. "Do you think this is the Bermuda Triangle? Unsolved mystery?" "Actually, I've always been very interested in these things, but that's not the main point. The most mysterious part of an unsolved mystery is the unknown. Right now, we don't know how 013 disappeared, but from the looks of it, the sudden appearance of this desert is directly related to the disappearance of 013. We can be sure that just yesterday, no, just a few hours or even an hour ago, this place was still a forest. It's impossible for this desert to appear." Lu Yang said softly. "I think I know what's going on." Wang Xingxiao's voice was calm. "Do you have satellite images? It doesn't matter even if it's a little blurry." Lu Yang was silent for a moment. Wang Xingxiao immediately realized something and shook his head helplessly. Of course, there were satellite images from before. The military low-altitude satellites of the Wang family of Beihai had been covering every corner of Beihai. However, with the end of the battle in Mount Dibing and Li Tianlan's departure from Beihai, Wang Xingxiao had immediately ordered the military satellites of Beihai to capture the images of Kanglan City. What happened here was still a blank space for Beihai for the time being. There are no satellite images. But according to the power detection system we have set up near Mount Dibing and Xingzhou, Your Majesty, there was a burst of extremely terrifying power fluctuations in an instant. Because our detection system is not very perfect at present, the data we get is not very accurate. But roughly speaking, the power fluctuations that burst out at that moment seem to have exceeded the peak of our current record. Wang Xingxiao's expression tightened. He knew very well what the peak of the power detection system that Beihai had recently developed meant. Because it had not been developed for long, some of the data had errors and could not even be detected. For example, the eternal sword above Mormons represented the peak of martial arts in the dark world for hundreds of years. Because of the overdraft of the master of Samsara Palace regardless of the cost, because of the ruthless full outburst, and because the chosen one's sword intent of Samsara were mixed together, it produced extremely complicated parameters that were difficult to measure accurately. The peak data recorded by the power detection system of Beihai was the data of Wang Tianzong's sword energy when he was in Mormons. That was the data when Wang Tianzong had just set foot on that supreme level after the breakthrough. The peak of the power that burst out at that moment just now surpassed that of Wang Tianzong in the period of Mormons. Li Tianlan broke through? How was that possible? Are you sure? Wang Xingxiao asked. There's no problem with the data, but the power appeared for a very short time, probably less than 2 seconds, and suddenly disappeared. Lu Yang's voice was a little confused. Wang Xingxiao held the phone and remained silent. Naturally, he did not think about the unsolved mystery. In his opinion, the helicopter was suddenly attacked when it flew over the sky. The strong sword intent or domain completely melted the helicopter in the flying state in an instant. Then Li Tianlan's full outburst. The extreme high temperature brought by the huge power evaporated everything in the forest in an instant, so the land became a desert. In theory, this could be explained. It was just a desert with a range of 20 kilometers. This sword covered an area of 20,000 meters. Was it so exaggerated? Was Li Tianlan not sure where the target was at that time? And how did Li Tianlan surpass Wang Tianzong in power? If he had broken through successfully, why did that power only appear for less than 2 seconds? Wang Xingxiao remembered the conversation with Li Tianlan before. Li Tianlan said that he was not sure to deal with Wang Tianzong's sword energy doppelganger, but he was sure to destroy the entire Wang family of Beihai. Was it because of this sword? If so, this sword seemed to be a kind of explosive ability. Then what was Li Tianlan's current state? The key was where Li Tianlan was now. Wang Xingxiao hesitated for a moment, but finally took out his mobile phone and dialed Qin Weibai's number. All the instruments were removed. All the drugs were taken away. After Nalan Shuriying's team left the huge bedroom on the top floor of the castle, the bedroom suddenly fell into silence. Li Tianlan was still lying silently on the bed, as if he had no vitality. Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan quietly, and then looked at Xianyuan Wushang. I don't understand what you mean. She said slowly, what does it have to do with me? It has a lot to do with it, but it's also something that can't be explained for the time being. Xianyuan Wushang said seriously, in my opinion, Big Brother Samsara sword, he was tricked. Maybe it's not the real situation, but it doesn't matter. Under normal circumstances, even if Big Brother broke through and entered the so-called Supreme Realm, he would not be able to exert the power of that sword. He could not even imitate it. The reason why he was able to fight back successfully in that situation was because of Big Sister-in-law in Europe. But that was also the problem. Because of Big Sister-in-law, Big Brother did not die completely, but it was also because of her that his current injury became a little troublesome. Why is that? Qin Weibai was baffled by his words. Because she's special. Xianyuan Wushang paused, suddenly smiled playfully, and said meaningfully, sister-in-law's situation is similar to time travel, or a parallel universe, or a rebirth. No matter what, under normal circumstances, since she is here, you shouldn't be here now. Well, let's not talk about this. The most important thing is that all this has happened now. He looked at Qin Weibai and said softly, "Sister-in-law, do you really think this is a coincidence? Do you really think there is no human factor in it? There are so many people in the world, and every day different people welcome death or new life. Why can sister-in-law have a rebirth? Is it possible to be a coincidence?" Qin Weibai's body suddenly shook. Human factor. Human factor. Human factor. What do you mean? She took a deep breath and asked in a low voice. Your existence is a very special form of existence that I can't understand. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head. To be exact, your existence is a paradox. Chapter 1031. How could there be so many coincidences? Xianyuan Wushang said something that Qin Weibai couldn't understand at all. He pressed his palm on Li Tianlan's chest. Wisps of dense white mist floated up from Li Tianlan's body. Xianyuan Wushang's expression was calm. He said softly, any incredible coincidence, in the final analysis, is a kind of inevitability. But most of the time, we can't understand it. A breeze suddenly blew. An airflow suddenly appeared in the bedroom with its doors and windows closed. Xianyuan Wushang's whole body began to glow. The clear light was hazy. The breeze blew away the clear light and gradually merged with the extremely thin white mist on Li Tianlan's body. Crack, the clear sound of bones cracking suddenly rang out. Qin Weibai suddenly opened her eyes wide. Xianyuan Wushang's hand on Li Tianlan's chest seemed to have lost all strength and support in an instant. The bones in his hand were almost shattered in an instant. The blood-stained white bones pierced through his flesh and skin. Crack, the dense sound of bones cracking, which was enough to make people's scalps numb, rang out. Xianyuan Wushang's head hung down without any warning. All the bones in his body seemed to have been shattered in an instant, and blood gushed out of his body. He had been sitting on the bed, but with the dense sound of bones cracking, his body lost its support in an instant and lay next to Li Tianlan in an extremely stiff posture. In Qin Weibai's sight, Xianyuan Wushang's expression and skin began to change at a speed visible to the naked eye. They turned blue and finally became a gray without any vitality. Blood flowed on his body. In this state, Xianyuan Wushang looked like a corpse that had been dead for an unknown period of time. Faint but shocking sounds of explosions kept ringing out in his body. Qin Weibai couldn't see what was happening in Xianyuan Wushang's body, but the constant vibrations seemed to be constantly tearing the strange things in his body. His heart, blood vessels, muscles, and bones seemed to be torn apart by that kind of power in the shortest time possible. Xianyuan Wushang's eyes were still open. His face was gray. His face, which used to look harmless to humans and animals, was now indescribably strange and ferocious. Qin Weibai had seen a lot of dead bodies. However, in the extremely quiet bedroom, the scene in front of her made her instinctively feel uncomfortable. Her scalp went numb, her body tensed up, and even her breathing seemed to carry a sense of nervousness and fear. Xianyuan Wushang didn't breathe or have a heartbeat. But his open eyes flashed with an incomparably clear trace of mockery and arrogance. A cold and gloomy voice sounded with disdain and contempt, "Order." The white mist and hazy clear light completely enveloped him and Li Tianlan. Xianyuan Wushang didn't finish. Qin Weibai can't hear. In the depths of the colorful consciousness, a voice echoed, "I am also an order." His voice seemed to spread throughout the entire space, echoing in the boundless world. It was quiet all around. Covered in blood, Xianyuan Wushang stood in place, staring blankly at the colorful world around him. His body was still lying beside Li Tianlan. But his own consciousness had already appeared in the depths of Qin Weibai's consciousness. The real Qin Weibai, or the depths of Gu Xinyan's consciousness. It was no longer a virtual doppelganger. Without that pair of glasses, Xianyuan Wushang didn't have the ability of virtual doppelganger and virtual intrusion. His current consciousness was his own consciousness. In other words, if he was trapped here, then Xianyuan Wushang in Emperor Dong's palace would die completely. This was undoubtedly a very serious consequence. But the problem was that Xianyuan Wushang seemed to have just noticed this problem. Blood continued to flow out of his body. Countless rays of light floated and shone around him. The moment he came to his senses, Xianyuan Wushang's expression suddenly changed. He looked as if he had seen a ghost, and he subconsciously blurted out a curse. The curse also echoed wildly between heaven and earth, like thunder all over the world. The light surged, indifferent and distant. Xianyuan Wushang's expression changed, and he didn't dare to move for a moment. Thousands of fur mud horses were galloping and roaring wildly in his heart. All his consciousness seemed to be completely frozen. There was only one thought left in his mind. Father, are you F** king trying to kill me? You are my father. Is this the F** king depth of Qin Weibai's consciousness? If he wasn't sure where he was, Xianyuan Wushang would even think that he had come to the wrong place. This is the F** king eternal furnace, Xianyuan Wushang murmured to himself. He hesitated for a long time, and finally took a tentative step forward. Puff! Blood suddenly burst out of his body. Xianyuan Wushang's body suddenly split open a huge wound that was so deep that bones could be seen. He looked down at the wound that almost spread to his heart, and wanted to cry but had no tears. My name is Wushang. I really want to go home. The reason was that the depth of Qin Weibai's consciousness was the same as Wang Tianzong's. Even if there was a difference, how big could the difference be? But the world in front of him was not the same concept as the depth of Wang Tianzong's consciousness. The depth of Wang Tianzong's consciousness was pitch black. It looked infinite, but also infinitely small. In fact, it was just a dot. But the depth of this colorful consciousness in front of him was completely like a boundless world. Where could he go to find Qin Weibai? Xianyuan Wushang took another step forward. The colorful light was slightly surging, and Xianyuan Wushang could not avoid it at all. Another wound was torn open on his body, dripping with blood. The clear light surged and enveloped his body, and the wounds on his body began to heal quickly. Xianyuan Wushang took a deep breath and continued to move forward. Another step. There was another wound. In the boundless light, Xianyuan Wushang kept moving forward. He had more and more wounds. Every time the wounds on his body reached a certain level, he would stop to heal himself and then move forward. Qin Weibai was still nowhere to be seen. His consciousness quickly sensed the exhaustion in his body. Time seemed to be meaningless. He didn't even know how long he had been here. He just kept healing and moving forward over and over again. Maybe it was 3 meters and 5 meters. Maybe it was 10,000 meters. Xianyuan Wushang, who was gradually numb, finally saw a mountain in front of him. In the constant light around him, the mountain was so different. The moment he saw the mountain seemed to see him. The light all over the world suddenly began to surge. The mountain began to tremble, but it was silent. The violent light all rushed over with the shaking of the mountain. There was light everywhere around him. The endless light instantly drowned Xianyuan Wushang. He was dripping with blood and covered with cuts and bruises. The body formed by Xianyuan Wushang's consciousness was completely torn apart again, and then reassembled with difficulty. Xianyuan Wushang gritted his teeth. This seemingly harmless fat man had an indescribable determination at this time. His eyes were firmly fixed on the mountain in the distance. The mountain was trembling and shrinking. The light tore his body, again and again. After an unknown period of time, the multicolored radiance finally began to fade. The world became a nearly solidified ink painting again. In front of Xianyuan Wushang, the mountain disappeared. Or rather, the mountain shrank countless times. It became a delicate and beautiful but incomparably huge crown, slowly floating not far from Xianyuan Wushang. It was so clear, so real, so majestic, and so beautiful. The whole world seemed to be completely dark. Only the crown in front of him was the only real thing. Real, Xianyuan Wushang's eyes were dazed. He looked at the crown in front of him and was silent for a long time. His consciousness had been exhausted to the extreme. He smiled in a trance. I see. Chapter 1032. Xianyuan Wuxiang's somewhat absent-minded voice reverberated in the depths of his colorful consciousness. Voices of, "So that's how it is," could be heard everywhere, like the whispers of heaven and earth. The huge crown floating in front of him glowed, layer upon layer of light spreading in all directions. Xianyuan Wuxiang stared blankly at the scene in front of him. Some vague images began to appear in his mind, but he couldn't remember them. The vague memories seemed to be from a very distant time ago, but also seemed to be from just a second ago. The images twisted as they appeared, and then quickly faded away. Xianyuan Wuxiang wasn't sure if he had ever seen the crown in front of him. It was so gorgeous and exquisite, and so dignified and graceful. Countless illusory lights wove it together, weaving it into reality. The scene in front of him seemed familiar, but for a moment Xianyuan Wuxiang didn't know what the crown meant. The light spread. Xianyuan Wuxiang continued forward. The distance between them continued to shrink. The crown seemed to be offended, and colorful light instantly gushed out. This time, the boundless light seemed to have a mind of its own. It was countless times more terrifying than what Xianyuan Wuxiang had just experienced. The clear, colorful light rushed through Xianyuan Wuxiang's body, instantly shattering the clear light covering his body. Countless pieces of his flesh were instantly torn to shreds. Xianyuan Wuxiang's face was deathly pale. He clenched his teeth and stubbornly moved forward in the sky full of light. He had long since run out of options. He had no way out of here before he saw the person he wanted to see. Large pieces of flesh fell off in the light. Blood that was so red that it was dazzling to the eyes flowed unscrupulously. He moved forward. Countless pieces of flesh fell off his body. Xianyuan Wuxiang's whole body was covered in countless wounds, and his bones were visible. His limbs, chest, abdomen, and head. Pieces of flesh were constantly torn off. Xianyuan Wuxiang disappeared in the light. Only a skeleton was left, persevering as it slowly walked forward. The red blood disappeared. Drops of golden liquid flowed out of the skeleton's bones. The golden blood turned into light, merging with the colorful light of the crown. The crown clearly sensed something, and the light around it suddenly stopped. The skeleton took the last step. He reached out, as if to touch the crown in front of him. The crown floated back for an instant. In the next second, countless images instantly enveloped the skeleton. It was like an abyss. All that was left of Xianyuan Wuxiang was his skeleton. An incomparably majestic yet incomparably gloomy voice echoed between heaven and earth. He failed. But there is still a chance. Can you afford to wait? Who knows how long it will take? Time is meaningless. I'll go. What can we do? Maybe I can't do anything, but at least I can be with him. You think this is a good thing? How is he now? It's hard to say. I can't find him. Based on his current state, he might have entered the Order Realm or fallen into the Shadow Realm. Perhaps. In short, none of the possibilities are what we want, but it's you, not me. What do you want? Whether it's real or illusory, I just want to be with him. Say no more. Brother, send us to Miracle City. Falling. Countless rays of light weaved into a bottomless abyss. The images were like a deep well that devoured all of Xianyuan Wuxiang's consciousness. From now on, I'm Gu Xianyan. Welcome to Kunlun City, welcome to Phoenix Pavilion. As clear as water, as pure as snow, as ethereal as wind, as cold as fog, she is an outstanding beauty. This woman will bring chaos to the world, remember this man. Li Tianlan. This is my goal. Stay by his side. Xian Yan greets your highness. Ha, the first beauty of Zhongzhou state deserves this title. Gu Xianyan leaves Kunlun City today. That's it. You have me completely. Really? Why don't you admit it? I don't know. You know it. Stop it. Don't force me. I'm pregnant. You're so perfunctory in naming your child. I hate it. Who dares to fight with me? It hurts. Why don't you fight back? I'm sorry. Xianyuan Wuxiang's consciousness fell into a snowstorm. Kill my man. It's us. Don't you think I look like a bird? The multicolored light and the multicolored sword light suddenly overlapped. I'll find him and take this world with me. All of you. Die with him. I want to be with him. From today on, you're called Gu Xianyan. I'm Qin Weibai. But I'm Qin Weibai, I am. I'm the future. I'm the past. Let me go, you bitch. No, I won't let you go. Li Tianlan, bastard. The almost eternal sword light pierced through the sky, piercing through the supreme monument of martial arts of this era. It's all over. The colorful sword light dissipated instantly. All the light around disappeared. Extreme darkness and silence enveloped everything. Xianyuan Wuxiang kept falling. His speed kept increasing. But there was always darkness and silence around him. Xianyuan Wuxiang, who was only a skeleton, couldn't even hear his own heartbeat and blood flow. The continuous fall seemed to become endless eternity. It was long and short. Everything lost its meaning. His consciousness gradually blurred, and his thoughts gradually solidified. The darkness around him was so real that it seemed to merge with him. Xianyuan Wuxiang struggled subconsciously. Boundless light suddenly shone brightly. The wind and snow filled the sky. The eternal sword light suddenly lit up in the wind and snow that filled the sky. The wind and snow were flying, and huge waves were surging. The sword light was like a rainbow, tearing the world apart. The whole world seemed to be full of chaotic and crazy sword light, with extreme silence and destruction. The corpses of the Wang family of Beihai were everywhere. The weapon fragments with empty ammunition covered the whole battlefield. The land was sunken, and the stage of formidable person was torn apart. The corpses spread all the way from afar. Xianyuan Wuxiang's sight seemed to cross the distance and fell on Xingzhou city not far away. The entire Xingzhou city had been completely turned into ruins. Countless corpses were scattered on every street and alley. The flag of the Beihai Corps had been broken. The entire Beihai Corps seemed to have been completely annihilated, destroyed along with Xingzhou city. The ruins of Mount Dibing were about to disappear. The violent waves of Beihai surged over and was about to cover everything that used to be Mount Dibing. The land turned into the sea. A quiet, almost old figure stood on the surface of the sea. Wisps of sword energy kept flowing out of his body and turned into the craziest and most silent sword light. The sword light drove the space, and the whole world seemed to undulate with his sword light. Xianyuan Wuxiang, who was completely a skeleton, looked at the man above the sea. This was clearly a man who had just entered middle age. He looked at most 40 years old. He did not look old at all. On the contrary, he was very handsome. He seemed to have inherited his mother's genes. Even in middle age, his appearance could still be described as handsome. Like the breeze at dawn, the moonlight at night, and the sunset at dusk, he was ethereal and dreamy. Just from his appearance, he was almost a perfect man without any flaws. But he was simply too quiet. That kind of quiet was indifferent and lonely, as if he had lost interest in everything in the world. For a moment, Xianyuan Wuxiang couldn't figure out how much pain and despair he had suffered in his life to become the current state step by step. The moment he saw him, he had already seen a touch of numb old age and fatigue under his perfect appearance. He stood quietly on the sea. The sword energy and heaven and earth shook together. Behind him was a group of densely packed figures also floating in the air. There were Chinese, Europeans, Americans, and even quite a few black people. There were people of all races. They floated neatly behind the man, looking at him with eyes full of fanaticism and worship that were almost irrational. The man, who was so quiet that he seemed to have lost his soul, turned a blind eye to the countless eyes behind him. Strong wind, huge waves, flying snow. He stood in the air and slowly moved forward. The sword energy began to condense, and his dead eyes became more and more determined. Why are you so persistent, Your Majesty? A helpless voice rang out. Less than a few hundred meters away from the man, there was a huge stone carved with countless names floating on the sea. A few figures were standing on it. An extremely ordinary-looking figure stood at the forefront of the huge stone. Behind him was a seriously injured young man and a woman whose age was unknown and whose whole body was integrated with some kind of metal. In the vast Beihai, the Wang family of Beihai that had stood at the peak of the dark world for hundreds of years. When everything ended, there was only the mother and son left. At the end of the road, the young man, who looked very ordinary both in appearance and temperament, said in a sincere voice, "The cause of the past is the effect of today. The Wang family of Beihai has been completely destroyed and vanished. Everything has come to an end. Why are you so ruthless, Your Majesty? Completely destroyed? Disappear into thin air?" The man, whose appearance, temperament, and every movement was perfect, sneered. "No, there are still 2 people alive. When they die, the so-called Wang family of Beihai will truly vanish. Li Dongsheng, I swear, if I can survive today, I will destroy the sword dynasty I built. I will make them die without descendants." On the huge stone, the seriously injured man standing behind the ordinary young man gritted his teeth and roared word by word. His tone was extremely sad and indignant. Almost everyone in the dark world knew that when President Wang Jingxin of Zhongzhou State retired, the Wang family of Beihai would be destroyed. Beihai had been preparing for a life-and-death battle with the Sword Dynasty a few years ago. In recent years, Beihai had been crazily cultivating experts and upgrading various weapon systems. All the financial resources were invested in it at all costs. All kinds of weapon systems were laid from Mount Dibing to Xingzhou City. The scale of the Beihai Corps was constantly expanding. All of this was for today. It was November 1st in Zhongzhou State time. Just yesterday, October 31st. The election of Zhongzhou State officially ended. Wang Jingxin resigned as president. Less than 2 hours later, Chen Xiaobei's eyes lit up. The Sword Dynasty soldiers marched into Beihai. The soldiers arrived at the city. Xingzhou was already in ruins. Needless to say, the other major sword-holding families outside Xingzhou were almost completely destroyed. The situation of each city would only be worse than that of Xingzhou, not better. The pride that the Wang family of Beihai had maintained for hundreds of years was almost torn apart today. As the center of the battlefield, Xingzhou. Sword god Li Dongxing landed in Xingzhou alone. He killed nearly half of the elites of the Beihai Corps and destroyed countless weapon systems. With countless weapon systems, the sword light was monstrous. Finally, he climbed Mount Dibing alone. It was impossible to stop and resist. But when a person could really be invincible to a certain extent, all the resistance became a complete joke in his eyes. Countless lineal descendants of the Wang family of Beihai died in the battle on Mount Dibing. In the entire Beihai, only Wang Haotian, summer solstice, and the stone of formidable person fell to the sea after the stage of formidable person was broken. If it weren't for this ordinary man who suddenly appeared in front of him and blocked Li Dongqing's sword, no one in Beihai would have survived. "Get out of the way," Li Dongqing said slowly. The man in front of him, who protected the last vitality of the Wang family of Beihai, didn't seem to have a high realm. He seemed to be at the peak of the invincible realm, but he blocked his sword light. He hoped that such a talent could stay for the Sword Dynasty. "Your strength is good. You can join the Sword Dynasty. In the future, the Sword Dynasty will have a place. Don't be a busybody," Li Dongqing said calmly. "I'm very willing to join the Sword Dynasty. I'm actually a painter. If I can be an art teacher in the Sword Dynasty, I think it's actually pretty good," but, the ordinary man laughed. "I'm not a busybody, Your Majesty. This is my family business." "Family business, understand?" Li Dongqing was silent for a while. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "I have no family business, and I don't have a home." "No family business, no home," the ordinary man's heart suddenly sank. Li Dongqing's voice was very soft, but he knew very well what this sentence meant. The blood feud was absolutely irreconcilable, and they would not stop until one of them died. He laughed bitterly. Do you know what it's like to lose your family? Li Dongqing suddenly asked. His voice was a little soft. The seemingly ordinary man thought for a while and asked, I killed my biological father with my own hands. Does that count? Li Dongqing, my master also killed his biological father with his own hands. Does that count? Li Dongqing, if it counts. The young man whispered, this feeling is actually very cool, but also very empty. It seems that all the goals of struggle disappeared the moment I killed him, and there is no direction in life. He looked into Li Dongqing's eyes. It's really cool, but after a moment of coolness, there is only endless emptiness. It's really not a good feeling. Your Majesty, now that you have completely destroyed the Wang family of Beihai, I feel the same as I did at that time. The only goal of living is to kill your father? Li Dongqing raised his eyebrows. Destroying the Wang family of Beihai had always been his goal, and it was even the only meaning of his life. Yes. The ordinary man was silent for a while and whispered, at least I used to be. Li Dongqing narrowed his eyes and suddenly asked, what's your name? Xianyuan Samsara. The ordinary man laughed. Tianjue, Xianyuan Samsara of the War God realm. Xianyuan Wushang's consciousness suddenly fluctuated for a moment. The light enveloped his body, but it did not hurt him. Instead, it pushed him forward. Xianyuan Wushang's body staggered forward and appeared directly on the sea. In an instant, countless eyes suddenly gathered on Xianyuan Wushang. Li Dongqing raised his eyebrows slightly, looking at the fat man who suddenly appeared, a little puzzled. At that moment, he did not even know how the man appeared. Xianyuan Samsara, who had just finished introducing himself, was obviously stunned. He looked at the fat man with an incredulous expression, and then it gradually turned into a touch of mockery. Hey, isn't this His Highness the Ninth Prince? What a rare guest. The corners of his mouth rose slightly, and the smile spread, but the sharpness in his tone suddenly became sharp. What are you doing here? Xianyuan Wushang seemed a little embarrassed, but then he calmed down and subconsciously moved closer to Li Dongqing, finally standing next to him. During the whole process, Li Dongqing did not guard against him at all and let him come closer. Wisps of clear light lit up on Xianyuan Wushang's body, and then it enveloped Li Dongqing's body. In an instant, Li Dongqing's sword qi became more and more stable, and his consumed physical strength rose wildly. In an instant, he returned to his peak state. You still dare to fight? Xianyuan Wushang, are you tired of living? Xianyuan Samsara's voice suddenly became incomparably sinister. Xianyuan Wushang looked at him expressionlessly. Do you really want to die? Don't put on airs with me, Ninth Prince. This isn't the space-time corridor. Indeed, this isn't the space-time corridor, but it seems like you can't deal with me. Do you want Master to send someone else? Or Master himself? If I can die under his sword, I'll be very honored, but do you really want war so much? This prince here represents the space-time corridor. Come, try and touch me. Xianyuan Samsara gritted his teeth. Scoundrel. We're not enemies. It's just a coincidence that I'm here. I'm not a terrorist, and I have no interest in this place. I'm only here to solve a problem. It's just that there's an accident now, so I see this face. Solve a problem? Xianyuan Samsara raised his eyebrows. Something happened to His Majesty? Xianyuan Wushang snorted coldly and began to heal the injuries of everyone from the sword dynasty behind Li Dongqing. He didn't need to worry about anything here. Even if something went wrong, it was the War God's realm's problem. What did it have to do with him? Isn't it because of Master? My big brother touched the sword energy that Master left behind. Xianyuan Samsara was dumbfounded. Are you kidding me? Anyway, it's a bit complicated. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't be here. Xianyuan Wuxiang shook his head. From the space-time corridor to the war god's realm, the difficulty wasn't the distance. Under normal circumstances, they could indeed contact each other, but it was impossible for them to meet in the North Sea. If it wasn't for Qin Weibai's consciousness space being too magical, he wouldn't be here at all. Tsk tisk, Xianyuan Samsara's tone was a bit strange. That His Majesty must be having a headache now. He glanced at Li Dongqing, who was frowning. At present, in terms of combat power, this person is stronger than the one next to him, his father, but he obviously didn't feel anything. So, how did His Majesty do it? I had an accident here. Xianyuan Wuxiang was still calm and said thoughtfully, it's not necessarily a headache. Maybe it's an opportunity. But when the time comes, we should ask Master or Master's wife for help. That's no problem. Xianyuan Samsara solemnly promised without any hesitation. If you need anything, just say it. There's no need to be stingy in this regard. But when the time comes, just be prepared to bleed a lot. Xianyuan Wuxiang nodded and fell silent. Xianyuan Samsara also fell silent. The two looked at each other for a moment. Xianyuan Samsara took the initiative to say, why aren't you leaving? I want to leave too. Xianyuan Wuxiang's expression was a bit tragic. But how? What do you mean? Xianyuan Samsara narrowed his eyes. I don't know. Xianyuan Wuxiang shook his head. No, I know, but I forgot. Xianyuan Samsara took a deep look at him and nodded. I understand. What do you say here? The little guy wants to fight with his life on the line. He might not be his match here. Xianyuan Wuxiang suddenly smiled somewhat playfully. He's already at that level. There are some things I should be able to say. In fact, the existence of the North Sea is still meaningful. I came here to protect the North Sea and to protect Li Dongqing. His mentality has been problematic for a long time. The last two people in the North Sea must stay. This can be regarded as a bit of Li Dongqing's obsession. He's completely crazy now. If he really destroys the North Sea, he won't have the motivation to live. When the time comes, his only choice is to self-destruct. If he really destroys himself, my master and His Majesty in the Imperial Palace will be heartbroken. So I came here. Just like how we appeared beside His Majesty, we are all guides. You've worked hard. Xianyuan Wuxiang nodded with a gratified expression. Xianyuan Samsara felt a little strange. No matter how he thought about it, it didn't seem right. What does this expression mean? Haha. Xianyuan Wuxiang smiled without saying anything. Li Dongqing's potential had already been affirmed. Because of the existence of his parents, he didn't need to be explained in any aspect. If Li Dongqing continued to grow, he would at least be a killing god at his peak. Because of his parents, it was unknown whether Li Dongqing would stay here when the time came. Xianyuan Wuxiang now really felt like someone else was helping his family cultivate a talent. Let's start the show. Xianyuan Wuxiang smiled. Let's see how to protect the North Sea and how to convince this little guy. Who is it? Li Dongqing's voice suddenly sounded. He didn't feel anything strange. While Xianyuan Wuxiang and Xianyuan Samsara were chatting, everything was speeding up. Although the two had said a lot, in the eyes of everyone else, it was less than a second. Feeling the recovery of his strength, Li Dongqing's tone seemed to have become somewhat gentle. Him? Xianyuan Samsara's voice sounded. You can call him uncle. He's father's friend. Li Dongqing suddenly narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? It's literally what I mean. Xianyuan Samsara shook his head. Your Majesty, there are a lot of things that you don't understand now. I should be able to tell you some of them now. In fact, there is no such thing as. The corner of Xianyuan Samsara's mouth was still moving. But all his voice suddenly disappeared in an instant. Li Dongqing's eyes flashed with doubt. In the next second, Xianyuan Samsara's face suddenly changed. His face quickly turned pale. The moment he suddenly closed his mouth, a wound suddenly appeared between his eyebrows. A scarlet drop of blood that reflected almost all the light flowed directly from between his eyebrows. Xianyuan Wuxiang's face suddenly changed. He subconsciously waved his hand, and a clear light enveloped Xianyuan Samsara, quickly healing his injury. What's going on? Li Dongqing raised his eyebrows inexplicably. That's about it. Xianyuan Samsara smiled bitterly. I want to tell you something, but I can't say it. It's not that I don't want to say it, but even if I say it, you can't hear it. Even if I write it on paper, you can't see it. Li Dongqing fell silent. At that moment, he could tell whether Xianyuan Samsara was pretending or not. Xianyuan Samsara obviously wanted to say something and said something. The fat man next to him could obviously hear it, but he couldn't. And the shape of Xianyuan Samsara's mouth was also distorted in an instant. He glanced at Xianyuan Wuxiang. I can't say it either. Xianyuan Wuxiang shook his head. Only when I reach the peak level can I hear the voice. But he's right, I'm indeed father's friend. I saw some interesting scenes. North Sea's Mount Dibbing was cut open by a sword, right? I've been there, so I should know. As for the current North Sea, no one cares whether these two people are killed or not, but it doesn't matter. Father is now. All the voices disappeared in an instant. At this moment, Li Dongqing clearly felt an abrupt but incomparably dense killing intent suddenly form around him. However, before that killing intent could envelop Xianyuan Wuxiang, a seven-colored light instantly enveloped his body. Xianyuan Wuxiang's figure quickly disappeared. Darkness, light, and countless chaotic scenes constantly flashed. Blood. Flesh splattered. Xianyuan Wuxiang became a skeleton again. His skeleton was covered in dense cracks, and countless amounts of golden liquid flowed out little by little from the cracks of his bones. The messy light stabilized again. The crown appeared in Xianyuan Wuxiang's sight once again. The crown was slowly shrinking. Xianyuan Wuxiang froze on the spot. After a long silence, he seemed to understand something. He raised his hand and waved it gently. His weak consciousness directly formed a very strange experimental platform in front of him. There was a very small tube on the experimental platform. A drop of water flowed out of the tube and eventually became a bubble. Her consciousness became clear from blurry. It was as if there were countless rays of light constantly moving away and then drawing closer. The moment her consciousness appeared, she didn't know where she was or who she was. It was as if she had just woken up after thousands of years of sleep. She was confused, and slow. She felt that she was walking forward. Walking in the pitch-black wilderness, there was not a single trace of light. Some pictures gradually appeared in her mind, as if different people were saying different things. Gu Xianyan, Qin Weibai, Li Tianlan, Dongqing Huangtu, Gu Xingyun, Xianyuan, Li Dongqing. All the experiences seemed to be completely connected, but in no order. The pictures began to become clear, forming different things one after another, but the order became more and more chaotic. She didn't know which thing happened first, and which thing happened later. She began to think about the order, and then she thought about the time. One thing after another, in an utterly confused sequence, led to different results. But no matter how it developed, people were always the most vivid in her memory. So what was the meaning of time and order? She moved cautiously in the darkness without any light, allowing countless images to flash through her mind. After a long time, she suddenly stopped for a moment and began to think about a very important question. Who am I? There seemed to be a lot of people in her memory. But where was the me in her memory? Was it Gu Xianyan? Was it Qin Weibai? Was it Li Tianlan? Was it Dongqing Huangtu? Was it, who am I? There seemed to be no place for her in all the memories. She suddenly felt a little irritable and angry. There was a little light in the distance. The light was getting bigger and more obvious, rushing toward her at an extreme speed. There seemed to be a figure flashing in the light, getting closer and closer to her. She saw an illusory vague shadow that seemed to dissipate at any time, coming toward her with endless light. She instinctively wanted to fight back. At the moment when she thought about it, countless lights completely enveloped the shadow. The shadow became more and more illusory, but it kept moving forward. She became more and more annoyed. She had just woken up, and her mood was extremely unstable. She instinctively wanted to control the light to kill the other party. A speck of golden light suddenly appeared in the colorful light. The moment the golden light and the light completely merged, she suddenly felt an unparalleled familiarity. The shadow seemed to appear beside her in an instant. The familiar feeling became clearer and clearer. She watched the other party stretch out his palm toward her. So she took a step back. The light under her control instantly shrouded her. The faint shadow disappeared. She herself was wrapped in endless light as she continued to fall. Until the deepest part of nothingness. The eternal silence passed slowly, as if it was meaningless. The sound of the slight collision of machinery suddenly sounded. She seemed to open her eyes from a deep sleep. There was darkness in front of her. The extreme darkness was slowly thinning. A little hazy and pure clear light lit up. She blinked, and the memory in her mind was very clear. It was the moment when Xianyuan blade pierced Wang Tianzong's chest. She took a step forward in a daze, subconsciously trying to get close to the clear light in the darkness. The clear light gradually became clear, and it seemed to be a transparent bubble that looked very big but very small. The bubbles spread all the way from a distance, and there were more and more of them. She hesitated and slowly walked in the direction where the bubbles drifted from. There were more and more clear lights, and the surroundings became brighter and brighter. A shining test bench gradually appeared in front of her. The test bench seemed to be operating by itself. She hesitated for a moment and continued to move forward. The test bench became clearer and clearer. The test bench shining with bronze luster looked old and mottled, with a strong breath of time. In front of the test bench, there was an illusory shadow that seemed to disappear completely at any time. The shadow was so illusory that she could not see its facial features or even its complete body. It kept busy in front of the test bench, and one bubble after another flew out of the test bench. She looked at it for a long time, and then said softly, "Okay? Okay." The shadow responded softly. In the dark space, Xianyuan Wushang saw the crown getting closer and closer to him, and finally stopped in front of the test bench. Different perspectives, different scenes. In the eyes of the crown, the skeleton in front of him was just a shadow that would disappear at any time. In the eyes of the skeleton, the Qin Weibai he wanted to find was just this crown. What was the essence? It was what all of them had been pursuing. "What are you doing?" In the darkness, she looked at the test bench and the shadow curiously and asked softly. "Waiting." The shadow laughed softly. The countless bubbles around seemed to disappear completely. Only the test bench continued to be busy. A drop of liquid flowed out of the test bench, and then gradually expanded. Qin Weibai seemed to want to ask something, but when she saw the water drop getting bigger and bigger, she subconsciously stopped asking and just focused on the drop of water that was getting bigger and bigger. The drop of water seemed to be filled with countless airflows, and began to expand, becoming rounder and more perfect. Infinite density. In silence, the shadow stared at the drop of water in front of him and said softly, "It's expanding, and its density is beginning to become thinner." Countless airflows gradually turned into starry light spots. The light spots began to merge into the drop of water little by little. Electrons, photons, neutrinos, the shadow continued to speak, and all kinds of light continued to merge into it. The drop of water began to expand faster, became the size of a fingernail, and then further spread. Its shape seemed to become rounder and rounder, and finally became a bubble again. There were more and more different lights. The shadow's voice also became more and more erratic. Atoms, nuclei, molecules, countless lights joined the drop of water again. The drop of water expanded to the size of a palm. She watched and listened carefully. The drop of water kept expanding, becoming the size of a head, a house, and a tall building. It expanded infinitely, covering the whole world. It was getting faster and faster. Qin Weibai didn't even know where the bubble had spread to. She and the shadow were completely wrapped in the bubble, and the transparent arc of the bubble had disappeared in the distance. But her instinct told her that the bubble was still expanding infinitely. There are more and more particles. The shadow's voice was a little dreamy. The starry light spots appeared around Qin Weibai again. They hovered in different places. They were unimaginably big in Qin Weibai's eyes. But in this expanding bubble, it seemed incomparably small, like a speck of dust. The starry light spots became more and more numerous. Qin Weibai's eyes were bright. The bubble suddenly became clear. All the edges seemed to begin to shrink and collapse. In her sight, the bright starry spots began to die out one by one. "Say," the shadow whispered, "if these tiny lights are conscious, how desperate must they be now?" His voice was very soft, but with absolute cruelty. Qin Weibai looked at it blankly and didn't speak. The infinitely large bubble shrank back at a very fast speed. Bang! The bubble turned into a drop of water. The drop of water suddenly exploded again. There was nothingness. Most of the starry light spots disappeared. Only a limited number of light spots were still shining. Qin Weibai quietly looked at those tenacious light spots, and suddenly there was a sincere joy and hope in her heart. The water droplets that exploded into nothingness turned into the most basic particles. The basic particles began to combine and turned into water droplets again. The water droplets turned into bubbles again and began to expand infinitely again. The shadow watched all this quietly, and the whole shadow exuded a kind of desolation that was close to despair. "Is it interesting?" he asked softly. Qin Weibai bit her lip tightly and shook her head subconsciously. She didn't find it interesting. She only felt a kind of unprecedented fear. The bubble shrank wildly and exploded again. In the nothingness, there were still a few shining light spots. But Qin Weibai was not sure if these light spots were the ones she had seen earlier. Water droplets, bubbles, expansion, contraction, explosion, it was a never-ending cycle. In this dark space, the constant repetition seemed to be the true eternity. "Can you understand it?" the shadow asked softly. Qin Weibai shook her head. "Do you find it familiar?" the shadow asked again. Qin Weibai wanted to shake her head, but all her movements stopped where she was. She did not shake her head or nod. Instead, she fell silent. "I understand." Xianyuan Wushang sighed softly. In fact, there was no need for communication. There was never a need for communication. He was sure of Qin Weibai's current state and understood the treatment plan for Li Tianlan. The bubbles exploded and expanded, over and over again, endlessly repeating the cycle. "What do you want to do here?" Qin Weibai asked. "The main purpose of my coming here is to do this experiment and determine whether I can understand it or not." Now that he had gotten the answer, whether Qin Weibai understood it or not, his trip was worthwhile. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said, "I should go." "Who is it?" Qin Weibai stared at the test bench in front of her and asked cautiously. "Leave the test bench here." Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said, "I can study it when I'm bored." "Who is it?" Xianyuan Wushang asked again. Xianyuan Wushang murmured in a low voice, "Or we are just a group of poor wretches struggling in despair to survive." His shadow floated up gently and went further and further away. The test bench was still working. The bubble expanded infinitely and turned into a world. Xianyuan Wushang's murmur echoed between heaven and earth, "Life is the greatest illusion." 10,000 word chapter. Chapter 1033. The darkness was slowly retreating, dissipating at a very slow speed. The surrounding space gradually became illusory. Xianyuan Wushang kept retreating. All the colorful light disappeared the moment Qin Weibai spoke. His body gradually became real, and flesh and blood began to appear on his pale skeleton. More and more flesh and blood formed his limbs and facial features. A seemingly harmless fat man appeared at the end of his consciousness. Xianyuan Wuxiang sighed and took a step forward. The depth of his consciousness was behind him. The bedroom of the palace master of Emperor Dong's palace was right in front of him. Everything around him seemed to be illusory. The world shone with different colors, and everything in sight seemed to have turned into numbers. Countless numbers formed densely packed data. Xianyuan Wuxiang raised his head. Everything in his sight was like a three-dimensional virtual world. Except for himself, everything else had become all kinds of data. The depth of his consciousness and the bedroom of the palace master stood face to face in front of him. Xianyuan Wuxiang slowly turned around and walked in another direction. Countless data around him slowly changed as he moved. It seemed that he was calculating something. Xianyuan Wuxiang calmly began to combine strings of data. His body was now pure thinking and consciousness. Consciousness and data had completed the initial integration, forming a thinking network in the virtual world that could communicate with the outside world at the fastest speed. His thinking continued to extend. Xianyuan Wuxiang's figure crazily shuttled back and forth in the virtual world at an infinite speed. The depth of his consciousness and the bedroom of the palace master instantly flew away. The surroundings became eternal darkness and silence again. Xianyuan Wuxiang's expression was extremely calm. The thinking network seemed to be constantly extending in an infinite space. His consciousness was extremely fast. It kept moving forward, but it also seemed to be motionless. When the space was large to a certain extent, there was no relative reference. Even if it was absolute speed, the situation seemed to be static. The world was originally quiet. His mind shuttled back and forth in the darkness. After an unknown period of time, the virtual dark world completely disappeared. Xianyuan Wuxiang's mind fluctuated. Finally, he felt a faint but extremely stable network signal. What appeared in front of him was a virtual network base station. It was a node in the space-time corridor quantum network system. Through the quantum network, his consciousness could be projected to any place in the space-time corridor in the shortest time possible. Xianyuan Wuxiang's consciousness touched the network signal. In the next second, countless chaotic images flashed before his eyes. Xianyuan Wuxiang's vision blurred, and his consciousness turned into a projection, appearing in a large hall. It might not be accurate to call it a hall, but it was absolutely correct. This was really a hall, but it was a hall so vast that it exceeded the limits of everyone's imagination. One after another, pillars so thick that they could almost support the entire world were arranged neatly, supporting the dome that had no end in sight when one looked up. Above the dome that was so far away that one could barely see the end of it. Above the dome that was a little dazzling, the light shone into the hall. The light was misty and warm, and the space on the left and right was boundless, as if there was no end at all. One after another, figures that looked small but had extremely terrifying auras sat in the corners of the hall. They were very far away from each other. Everyone was suppressing their own auras, but the energy that naturally overflowed from their bodies tore through space uncontrollably, making the entire hall look blurry. As far as Xianyuan Wuxiang could remember, this was the 4th time he had come here. Every time he attended a meeting here, his heart would be in turmoil. This was the center of power in the space-time corridor. It was where all the higher-ups held their meetings. The Apex Hall. The design of the Apex Hall looked like a very regular cube, with a length of 0.01 light years. 3 real young stars were burning above the dome, and the energy of the stars continuously replenished the Apex Hall. There was nothing extra in the hall, but almost everything that appeared here represented a part of the Apex Hall's history. To be able to attend a meeting here, one needed not only status, but also strength, status, and responsibility. Xianyuan Wuxiang was the 9th prince of the space-time corridor. His status and strength were enough to be here, but before this, except for some special occasions, he didn't have enough status or responsibility. So he had only been here 3 times. But now, he had become Li Tianlan's guide. Whether it was status or responsibility, Xianyuan Wuxiang was already qualified to have a seat here that belonged to him for a long time. His heart was in turmoil. Xianyuan Wuxiang was silent. He bowed slightly to the various figures wrapped in the distorted space in all directions. His voice was very calm. Everyone, I am Xianyuan Wuxiang. Please take care of me in the future. Everyone knew his name. But before this, everyone called him the Ninth Prince. But now, he had his own name here. A clear and steady voice rang out within the range of 0.01 light years. It was not loud, not noisy, and seemed to be ringing in one's ears. Take care of each other. Xianyuan Wuxiang slowly turned around and looked at the central seat of the apex hall. Compared to the figures around him, which seemed a little distorted because of the power, there was a soft but incomparably real golden light on the seat of the host. Everything seemed to be contained in that golden light. No one could look directly at it, no one could probe it, and no one could offend it. It was incomparable majesty and momentum, like the entire world. Father. Xianyuan Wuxiang bowed deeply, his voice respectful and calm. Sit. A deep and steady voice rang out from the host's seat. A piece of nanoparticles extended from the void in front of Xianyuan Wuxiang. The nanoparticles slowly assembled, turning into a seat of the same specifications as the other seats. Wuxiang, how is His Majesty doing? As soon as Xianyuan Wuxiang sat down, a voice rang out beside him. The so-called beside was actually extremely far away in the range of light years. But at this time, everyone's aura was completely connected, so the voice was extremely clear, and the distance was meaningless. Countless eyes were focused on Xianyuan Wuxiang. Li Tianlan. This was the only important thing in this meeting. Everyone knew that His Majesty, who was in a strange state in Miracle City, was in a very serious problem, but not many people knew what the problem was. He sensed and reincarnated the sword chi that War God's realm used to cut Miracle City. Although he didn't succeed, he suffered a very strong backlash. If it wasn't for the protection of the real brand, I'm afraid he would have to start all over again. The apex hall suddenly fell silent. Time passed slowly. After an unknown amount of time, an incredulous female voice slowly said, I saw the whole process of Miracle City being cut. Although War God wasn't at his peak, he was still a rare expert. To feel that sword chi, he had to be at least at heaven's end, but His Majesty couldn't have reached that level in Miracle City. There are many reasons, but the cause was my mistake. Xianyuan Wuxiang's voice was low. The guardian I brought there made a move. Although he was very careful, he still changed something, and that sword chi also showed a little bit. Moreover, King Wei was always by His Majesty's side. At that time, King Wei was on His Majesty's body, and His Majesty had the real brand. Although it was very weak, I think both His Majesty and King Wei sensed something the moment the sword chi appeared. After a pause, he continued, this was my mistake. No one accused him of anything. They accepted Xianyuan Wuxiang and gave him a seat, so he was a true colleague. Just as Xianyuan Wuxiang said to Qin Weibai, they were a group of pitiful people struggling in despair to survive. Pitiful people, lonely souls, no matter what, in the current situation, there might be external battles in the time corridor, but the internal higher-ups had no energy to plot anything. Since they were on the same side, the mistakes of colleagues were their own mistakes. It's not necessarily a bad thing. A calm voice rang out. The three young stars above the palace instinctively trembled. Xianyuan Wuxiang immediately understood that it was the voice of country guarding Duke. It's just a little troublesome. An incomparably cold voice rang out, and it was filled with wanton killing intent. The space in the apex palace trembled slightly, and the War King's voice continued to ring out. His killing intent and battle intent continued to surge. Your Majesty has accidentally touched that sword chi. The location of Miracle City might be exposed very soon. The two sides have been searching for Miracle City's location. If they find anything, they will definitely take action. Miracle City is the ancestral land, and its importance is self-evident. The one who will act this time may be an apocalypse. That's impossible. On the main seat, the golden light slowly said, we can sense each other's apocalypse. Unless they really want to start a full-scale war, the apocalypse will not act. War God's realm killed an apocalypse not long ago, and with Miracle City, it may be an opportunity for them to start a war. Country Guarding Duke's voice sounded a little solemn. The golden light flickered slightly, and an extremely calm voice came from the light. No, if Miracle City is exposed, the one who will act will at most be an apostle. Apostles were also important figures worthy of everyone's attention, and they could be said to be the strongest in group battles among those of the same level. There was no one else. Not to mention an apostle, even Xianyuan Wushang, who had countless auxiliary abilities but was the weakest among those of the same level, could cause devastating damage to Miracle City if he disregarded the consequences. It's fine. Xianyuan Wushang said in a low voice, if it's just an apostle, the guardian and I can stop them. The voice in the golden light sounded again. I will contact the palace and cover the location of Miracle City again. The surging aura of War King calmed down. The incomparably calm voice, which could make the stars tremble with every sentence, sounded again. How is Her Highness's situation? Her true imprint is second only to His Majesty. How is her condition? Xianyuan Wushang frowned and suddenly said, how long have I been in the depths of Her Highness's consciousness? Time is meaningless, Country Guarding Duke said softly. The Country Guarding Duke said softly, if you must calculate, it has been about 400 years since you entered the depths of Her Highness's consciousness. Note, this is your time. Here, it is 2 hours, 400 years, 400 years, Xianyuan Wushang frowned even more. Her Highness's true imprint is still transforming, but the transformation is beyond expectations. There is already a trace of the embryonic form of the eternal furnace in the depths of her consciousness. I went to the other half of Miracle City in the depths of her consciousness and saw Xianyuan reincarnation. Xianyuan reincarnation? The Country Guarding Duke raised his eyebrows slightly. The chief disciple of the god of war? Yes. Xianyuan Wushang nodded. He's Li Dongqing's guide. I saw the first meeting between Xianyuan Luanhui and Li Dongqing, but I'm not sure if what I saw is happening or if it's already in the past. Time is meaningless. The Country Guarding Duke repeated again and suddenly laughed. Whether in the space-time corridor or the war god's realm, Xianyuan reincarnation, the first disciple of the war god, is known as the first celestial end. The war god values him very much. He became Li Dongqing's guide. Is this because he is afraid that the space-time corridor will snatch him in the future? There was a burst of laughter in the summit hall. Everyone felt that this matter was interesting. Only the golden light on the main seat remained calm. Go on. Xianyuan Wushang nodded. The time I went was too coincidental. I am not sure if it was a real coincidence or Her Highness's true imprint was guiding me. If it was the latter, it means that Her Highness's true imprint has shown signs of recovery. But obviously, Her Highness's will is still chaotic under my test. If you want His Majesty to recover in the most perfect state, it will take time. We need to wait for Her Highness's true imprint to recover. It will take a long time. 100 years, 200 years, or even longer is possible. This is the real time of Miracle City. It is meaningful. No one could refute this. Everyone knew what the real time of hundreds of years meant to Li Tianlan. Miracle City's definition of strength is very interesting. They divide different strengths and use a very abstract word, realm. Oh, chi-controlling realm, ice-condensing realm, fire-flaming realm, thunder-shocking realm, and invincible realm. This seems to be the top combat capability of Miracle City at present. There is no clear division of realms for people who have surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. In addition, there is another division that does not count as a realm, the chosen one. That is, the invincible realm. They call it the supreme realm, but there is still no clear name of the realm. In my opinion, the supreme realm is equivalent to completely getting rid of the limitations of the invincible realm. It is not surpassing the peak of the invincible realm, but truly entering a new level. To be precise, the peak strength of the chosen one should be equivalent to 3 to 4. 5 levels of authority. His Majesty may be able to break the limit of 5 levels, but not too much. Good lord, 4. 5 levels of authority. Isn't that really invincible? If the battlefield is limited to Miracle City, even Heaven's End realm may not be his opponent. What level was His Majesty at when he left Miracle City? Warlord's roaring laughter rang out. 4. 7 levels of authority. In the golden light of the main seat, a steady voice rang out. With His Majesty's potential, this data is very likely to be equaled. When I arrived at Miracle City, His Majesty was engaged in a battle. I can be sure that His Majesty has touched the order in some aspects, but his martial arts is still his main foundation. And don't forget, King Wei has always been by his side. In this case, once he reaches the peak strength of Miracle City, with King Wei in hand, it is almost equivalent to having the power of the 5th level of authority. You know what the 5th level of authority of Miracle City means. Go on. The voice in the golden light was steady and without any fluctuation. His Majesty's current combat strength is close to the limit of Miracle City, but this kind of strength also has flaws. His physical strength has not kept up with the current combat strength. If the true imprint in the depths of His Majesty's consciousness is completely awakened, then this problem can indeed be solved, but His Majesty's true imprint is only showing signs of awakening. Everyone, we can't wait too long. So I think that the current secondary method is the best one. We have no way to use His Majesty's true imprint to recreate a real body for His Majesty, so we can only use conventional treatment methods to heal him and make up for the lack of physical strength. As for what we want, His Majesty's physical condition, there will always be a chance in the future. But if we do this, His Majesty's future progress will be slower. A hesitant voice rang out, moreover, King Wei has always been with His Majesty. With him, His Majesty's physical strength doesn't need to worry too much. If we use the second method, the price we need to pay is too high. We have no way to calculate the real time and His Majesty's time here. In fact, if we wait for the true imprint in the depths of His Majesty's consciousness to awaken, it will take at least 100 or 200 years of real time. At that time, all aspects of His Majesty's body will truly become perfect, and he will be able to enter the killing god level without any reservations. But 100 or 200 years, none of us can be sure what will happen during this period of time. For this plan, the only thing we can do now is to wait. If we use the second method, His Majesty will immediately wake up. Our treatment doesn't need to be thorough. While making up for his physical strength, we will deliberately leave some flaws. When His Majesty's true imprint recovers in the future, we will make up for these flaws. But the price is that after His Majesty leaves Miracle City with His Majesty, there will be no real time. The process of His Majesty's true imprint's recovery will be delayed for an unknown period of time, which will delay His Majesty's advancement. We don't know how long this will take. At the same time, we need to pay an extremely rare truth potion to make up for His Majesty's true injuries. I admit that the price is high, but this is the only way, Xianyuan Wushang said slowly. Xianyuan Wushang said slowly, we all know that no one can afford to waste such a rare moment of real time. There was silence. After a long time, an unfamiliar voice, which had been silent, rang out. His Majesty's injury came from War God. The atmosphere became more and more silent. Even Xianyuan Wushang didn't know what to say for a moment. The one who spoke was the first prince, who was also Xianyuan Wushang's elder brother. His tone was full of bitterness. The war god of the war god realm. He had only left Miracle City for a few hundred years. But after getting rid of the real time in Miracle City, no one knew how long had passed in his war god realm. Time was meaningless. No one could be sure for thousands of years. The two from Human Emperor Palace and War God Realm also rose from insignificance to stand at the top. Decades ago in real time, War God personally separated Miracle City. The tacit consent of Time Corridor was equivalent to recognition of the status of War God Realm and Human Emperor Palace. At that time, War God was already a top expert. The sword chi he left at that time was now touched by Li Tianlan, and then caused real injuries. Then, in the case that Time Corridor couldn't activate Qin Weibai's true imprint, they could only pay a truth potion whose level could not be lower than that of War God to save Li Tianlan. Save Li Tianlan? Time Corridor didn't have such an option. To save Li Tianlan, they had to pay such a precious potion. Such a potion represented that it was close to the level of War God decades ago. That was to say, if it could save Li Tianlan, it could also save an expert close to the level of War God. How many such experts could there be in the whole time corridor? This even meant that the lives of the future His Majesty or several lords were used to save Li Tianlan. Of course, they had to save him. But the price was too high. Time Corridor was ahead of War God Realm and Human Emperor Palace in many technologies. But in terms of potions, War God Realm and Human Emperor Palace had been studying for countless years. In this respect, they were ahead of Time Corridor. Time Corridor also had this kind of potion that could make up for real injuries. But to make up for Li Tianlan's level of potion, if Time Corridor wanted to save his life, they had to either spend unimaginable resources to gamble on a bottle, or they had to put down their pride and spend a small but still massive amount of resources to ask War God Realm for a bottle. This was a very difficult thing for everyone. War God and His Majesty have a relationship, maybe. When he left Miracle City, the Li family didn't exist yet. Their relationship had faded. At least we can talk to each other. Silly, Time Corridor needs to talk to others? What do you think we are? Ridiculous self-esteem. How can we not bow our heads when we need help? All right. A steady voice sounded in the golden light. A crystal bottle without any luster suddenly floated out of the golden light and finally fell in front of Xianyuan Wushang. There were a few drops of completely transparent liquid in the crystal bottle. They looked like a few drops of pure water. There was nothing unusual about them. This is the latest achievement of War God Realm. I fought with Lin Xianyuan some time ago, and he lost to me. Xianyuan Wushang was stunned. In the Summit Palace, War King snorted coldly. There was only one His Majesty in the Time Corridor, and he was fully deserving of being the strongest. Other than that, the strongest was War King, the King of War. It could be said that he was truly above tens of thousands of people. War God Lin Xianyuan of War God Realm did come to Time Corridor some time ago, but the first person he challenged was not His Majesty, but War King. The Battle King had lost. He had lost countless resources. And His Majesty won. He won this bottle of medicine. In this way, it was equivalent to the Time Corridor paying a huge amount of resources in exchange for this bottle of medicine. War King was a little depressed, but there was nothing he could say. That's it. His Majesty in the golden light said softly, then suddenly asked, "How is King Wei's condition?" It's still in a split state, but King Wei's core seems to have been contaminated to some extent. King Wei's body still retains a pure will, but his core desperately yearns for freedom. If it wasn't for his core, His Majesty might not have touched that sword chi. Contaminated? An extremely sharp sword light suddenly flashed in the hall. Order or shadow? I can't be sure at the moment. But His Majesty can solve this matter. As he spoke, he finally reached out and took the medicine in front of him. His Majesty grunted. He seemed to want to say something, but when the words were about to come out of his mouth, he suddenly moved his mouth and grunted with a raised tone. Beep! An ear-piercing voice rang out in the Apex Palace without any warning. Warning, warning. High-frequency energy vibration detected. Data matching in progress. Data matching completed. Space fragmentation detected. Compatibility 100%. Warning. Warning. Peak energy source detected. Alignment analysis in progress. Analysis complete. Alignment, neutral. Everyone's body slightly relaxed. The shrill warning faded away. But the sound of the notification still echoed in the Summit Palace. Peak energy source detected. Matching target, Human Emperor. Similarity 57%. God of War. Similarity 99. 7%. Target confirmed. God of War of God of War. Analyzing target's existence form. Analysis complete. Target is sword chi projection. Communication signal detected. Countless notifications became softer and softer. On the main seat of the summit palace, the golden light jumping became more and more real. His Majesty's voice rang out from the golden light, "Open the door and welcome the guest." Silently, a huge vortex appeared in a certain direction of the apex palace. The huge vortex swallowed all the light and surrounding matter the moment it appeared. The vortex became stable in the shortest time possible. A slowly rotating black hole slowly extended from the void until it reached the wormhole that had suddenly appeared in the distance. A sword light that almost illuminated the lonely void appeared from the wormhole and entered the black hole in an instant. The sword beam shuttled through the black hole and finally landed at the singularity in the deepest part of the black hole. The light of the star shone on the singularity inside the black hole. The incomparably bright and resplendent sword light transformed into a figure that looked extremely young. In the summit palace, everyone except His Majesty stood up and nodded. "Your Majesty, God of War." The war god, who looked extremely young, nodded slightly. The sword light that contained boundless energy surrounded him like a dense fog, enveloping him from head to toe. "I'm here to deliver something." The projection of the divine god of battle raised his hand. A bottle of medicine similar to the one His Majesty had just given Xianyuan Wushang appeared and slowly floated in front of him. The real golden light paused for a moment. "This is exactly what we need." His Majesty's voice was calm. "What resources does the war god realm want?" "Forget about resources. He and I are family. It's not a loss to save him once." The voice of the god of war was clear and indifferent, but there was a hint of toughness in his words. Perhaps he had slowed down his tone, but his habitual words carried an indescribable kind of strength. "Family?" The war king's deep voice suddenly sounded, as if he was roaring, "Lin Xianyuan, what do you think our Majesty is? He is indeed using your 24 moves of sword now, but do you really think you deserve to be the ancestor of His Majesty?" The projection of the god of war slowly turned around and looked in the direction of the war king, remaining silent. The atmosphere in the summit palace suddenly became oppressive. The smell of gunpowder was getting stronger and stronger in the air. Xianyuan Wushang subconsciously touched the medicine in front of his chest, a little nervous. The god of war of the war god realm, Lin Xianyuan. Just like his father, people at their level, be it in the space-time corridor or the war god realm's mortal palace, were fully deserving of their status as legends. For countless years, the time-space corridor had become more and more stable. The war god realm had gradually become low-key, and the human emperor was at the most critical moment. Under such circumstances, the god of war of the war god realm had almost become the most powerful card of the human race. Strong, cruel, iron-blooded, crazy. In the time-space corridor and the war god realm, where there was no real time, the fall of the first doomsday in thousands of years was done by the god of war. Killing the doomsday in a disadvantageous situation, such a battle record could almost be said to be the real peak of martial arts. And everyone remembered the system notification just now. The matching data of the peak energy source showed that the god of war was 99.7%, not 100%. Although there was only a small difference, there was no doubt that the god of war had improved since the last time. He was not a good-tempered person. Even in the Order camp and the Shadow camp, his domineering strength was well known. "Watch your tone, I don't want there to be a next time." The god of war was silent for a while, then said in a calm tone. "The war king's words are too harsh, but not without reason. Your Majesty, your family's words are indeed inappropriate. I know you are strong, but do you really think that His Majesty's temper is better than yours? In the future, when he returns and finds out about your words and actions today, it is destined to be karma again. Not only did you not get the favor, but you also messed up the relationship. Is it not good?" An old voice rang out from the Apex Palace. "Everyone, please don't misunderstand." The god of war said calmly, "I am talking about a family, not inheritance. My daughter admires Li Dongqing very much. After Wuxiang saw samsara and we got the news, my daughter took out this bottle of potion from her own quota. Silence reigned. Everyone was a little shocked. This so-called family, could it be that the god of war was going to marry that His Majesty? Which princess of the war god realm is it? In the golden light, His Majesty's voice had a hint of a smile. Little six. The god of war shook his head slightly. Is it the sixth princess? The smile in His Majesty's tone became more obvious. They are a good match. Let's see their own fate. The god of war said calmly, I have another condition. Please say it. His Majesty said in a deep voice. With this potion, the corridor of time and space was worth agreeing to some of the god of war's requests. My youngest son needs some training. I'll let the ninth prince take him to Miracle City for a few decades of real time. The god of war said calmly. The corner of Xianyuan Wuxiang's mouth twitched fiercely. The youngest son of the god of war. Although he was the youngest son, in fact, he was not small at all. He was known as the little god of war. Even in the entire war god realm, he was ranked among the top experts. Wouldn't it be like Mars colliding with Earth to let him go to the Miracle City? Even you can't guide him? Do you still need to do this? His Majesty was a little surprised. I have taught him everything that needs to be taught. He has his own threshold. The god of war shook his head. The Miracle City is a good place. He is suitable to die there. Maybe only after experiencing a real death can he break through again. Let Li Tianlan kill him. The war god realm will take care of everything afterward. His Majesty was silent for a while and looked at Xianyuan Wuxiang. Xianyuan Wuxiang nodded helplessly. I only hope that Your Highness can be careful. I just want him to die once. I don't want him to be completely destroyed. He will pay attention to what needs to be paid attention to. In the calm voice of the god of war, his figure gradually dissipated into sword light all over the sky. The sword light rushed out of the pinnacle palace and slowly disappeared. The consciousness of the god of war had returned to the war god realm. His Majesty looked at it silently. Finally, he nodded, that's good. The golden light shone on the main seat and finally disappeared. The pinnacle palace began to become quiet and empty. One by one, the projections gradually dissipated. Xianyuan Wuxiang touched the potion in his arms and said with a sad face, It's too difficult for me. No one answered him. He was the only one left in the pinnacle palace. Becoming Li Tianlan's guide and thus obtaining the qualification to enter the pinnacle palace officially meant that this matter was extremely important. Xianyuan Wuxiang sighed and closed his eyes. He opened them again the moment he closed them. It was as if time had frozen for a second. Before the words he said when he entered the depths of his consciousness, Qin Weibai's voice sounded. Qin Weibai's voice rang out. What's wrong with you? What order? I'm not crazy, really. Oh, naive. Which madman will tell you that he's crazy? I'm not crazy. Chapter 1034. Xianyuan Wuxiang's misty eyes became extremely clear the moment Qin Weibai's voice sounded. His complete consciousness was still in the process of gradually returning. It started when his body fell softly beside Li Tianlan. Entering the depths of his consciousness, he saw Li Dongcheng and Xianyuan Luanhui. The meeting in the Summit Palace, scenes began to appear one after another. Xianyuan Wuxiang was not sure how long he had experienced. Because time was meaningless. No matter how long it was, in the most real time, it was less than a second. His heart gradually beat. The blood in his body began to speed up. Xianyuan Wuxiang, who was lying beside Li Tianlan in a very strange posture and covered with wounds, looked like a dead man, moved slightly. Countless blood began to flow back into his body. His bones healed quickly, and his heartbeat became strong again. The gray color on his face, which was full of a strong sense of death, gradually faded and became ruddy. In the most real environment, Xianyuan Wuxiang became the most illusory state again. He reached out to hold his head and slowly sat up. Nothing, Nothing, a little messy. Xianyuan Wushang's voice was a little slow. Qin Weibai's voice was a little hesitant. She was not even sure what had happened just now. Fast. Too fast. She heard the dense sound of bones cracking, saw Xianyuan Wushang fall beside Li Tianlan covered in blood, and saw his face become like a dead body. Everything seemed to happen really, but also like an illusion. She just blinked and received the message in her brain. Xianyuan Wushang had returned to normal. I'm fine. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head hard. Qin Weibai still wanted to say something, but Xianyuan Wushang's words had completely diverted all her attention. I found a way to treat my brother. What? Qin Weibai was stunned, and then her eyes suddenly lit up. What way? This. Xianyuan Wushang reached into his arms and took out a very delicate and small crystal bottle. There were about 10 drops of transparent liquid in the crystal bottle, which was shaking slightly, looking like the purest water. This is, Qin Weibai was a little confused. Sister-in-law, if you trust me, let me use this potion for my brother. In terms of technical level, this thing is many generations more advanced than the immortality potion of the Wang family of Beihai. So it can not only cure my brother's injury, but also repair most of his body's hidden dangers. Xianyuan Wushang said softly, it wasn't easy for my family to obtain this bottle of medicine. He held the potion tightly, and his voice became calmer and calmer. I'm sure. This is the only way to save Big Brother. The key is, do you believe me? Believe it or not. Qin Weibai looked into Xianyuan Wushang's eyes and remained silent for a long time. Li Tianlan's injury was indeed very serious. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he had already fallen. Naylan Shuriying, who represented the highest medical level of this era, expressed that she was powerless. She didn't even mention her third-generation immortality. What this meant was self-evident. Even if Qin Weibai didn't trust Xianyuan Wushang, she had no other choice. The origin of this potion was unknown. At least in Qin Weibai's eyes, Xianyuan Wushang just lay on the bed for a while, and then there was this potion. She didn't know what was in this potion, but in Li Tianlan's current state, whether she believed it or not, Qin Weibai's only choice was to try it. I have no choice. She shook her head gently. I see. Xianyuan Wushang nodded and gently unscrewed the cap. There was nothing unusual. The 10 drops of water were still shaking slightly in the crystal bottle. A glimmer of light appeared in Xianyuan Wushang's hand. The light seeped into the mouth of the bottle. Xianyuan Wushang was feeling the liquid in the bottle with great caution, making the final confirmation. He was a saint. Of course, there was a path above saint. However, in the extremely long time of the space-time corridor, there was no way to continue to promote saint. Not only the space-time corridor, but also the Emperor Palace and the War God realm. Unless the order was completely promoted, saint was already the peak of the human clan. In the real environment of Miracle City, Xianyuan Wushang could use his authority to confirm the effect of this potion. Qin Weibai had no choice but to believe in Xianyuan Wushang. But Xianyuan Wushang didn't dare to completely trust the War God realm. There was an Emperor Palace in the War God realm. But here, there was only the space-time corridor. Although the combined forces and resources of the War God realm and the human Emperor Palace couldn't compare to the space-time corridor, the difference was not that big. Both sides weren't enemies, but strictly speaking, they couldn't be considered friends. They could cooperate and trade, all for the sake of survival. Neither the War God nor the one in the Emperor Palace was a villain, but Li Tianlan was too important to the space-time corridor. No one could afford any accident. Everyone in the space-time corridor was waiting for his return. The War God was also very clear about this. Now, if he really did something to make an accident happen to Li Tianlan, then the space-time corridor could not recover the loss even if it died with the other party. Xianyuan Wushang had no way to describe Li Tianlan's importance to the space-time corridor, but the most basic example was that in order to protect Li Tianlan and let him return in the future, there was no one in the space-time corridor that could not be sacrificed. This key was simply irreplaceable. The reason given by the war god in the Pinnacle Palace was indeed sufficient. But if Li Tianlan's importance to the space-time corridor was taken into account, then the so-called sufficient was not sufficient. The latest true potion developed by the war god realm was indeed very important and precious. Every bottle, or even every drop, represented a huge amount of resources. But in this matter, such a bottle of potion was nothing. The dense clear light analyzed the liquid in the crystal bottle little by little. Xianyuan Wuxiang nervously observed the liquid in the bottle. In this environment, if the war god had left any backup in the crystal bottle, with his authority, it was almost impossible that he could not find it. The clear light and the clear water vibrated slightly, looking very harmonious. The constantly fluctuating clear light even analyzed every water molecule in the liquid, but found no problem. Xianyuan Wuxiang breathed a sigh of relief, finally relieved. Then I'll start. He glanced at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai nodded and stared at Xianyuan Wuxiang's eyes. Sister-in-law, don't worry. Xianyuan Wuxiang smiled, looking harmless. He turned to face Li Tianlan, holding the crystal bottle in his hand, and directly turned it over. Boom! In the blink of an eye, an extremely loud sound of tide suddenly rang out in the bedroom. The sound of tide rushed out of the bedroom in an instant, echoing over the entire Emperor Dong's palace. More than a dozen drops of liquid in the crystal bottle vibrated violently. In front of Qin Weibai's eyes, there seemed to be endless water directly gushing out of the small crystal bottle. The water was overwhelming, completely enveloping Li Tianlan's figure. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.